All right, everybody. Hello, everyone who's joining Kabbalah Explained Simply right now. This is Joseph, and I'm broadcasting to you live from Israel. This is Kabbalah Explained Simply. We will start in just a moment. We're gonna talk about how thoughts create floods, or better yet, prevent them. Hopefully. Yeah, already see that a bunch of you are connected from many different places. Yeah, such as Nigeria and Brazil and the UK and Quebec, Canada, New Jersey. Hello there, Hungary. Yeah, New York is in the house. The Netherlands, Florida. This is great. More New York, Utah. Uh, Great. All right, Slovenia. Hello there. Yes. Okay, terrific. So we're gonna start in just a moment. The situation right now on planet Earth is not that great, people. It's not that great. Hopefully, we can somewhat discuss how there is something we can somewhat do to nudge things a little bit in the right directions. Hopefully, we can do this together. So, Kabbalah explains simply how thoughts create floods or prevent them. Coming up. All right, welcome to Kabbalah Explained Simply. We are meeting today in not such great circumstances, I have to say, because if you look at the planet, it's not going so well. It is not going so well. What we've seen in the last few weeks, this broadcast is happening live right now in towards the end of August 2021. And in the last few weeks, we've seen all of this. These are just a few snapshots of what is going on in the planet right now. There have been devastating floods in places like Turkey and Germany and Austria and Italy and India. So very, very widespread, very different places around the planet. We've seen deadly heat waves in places like Canada, the west coast of the US, southern Europe. I've read somewhere, saw an article that said it was horrible. Said that the salmon fish in some places are cooked inside the water because it's so hot. And July 2021 was officially the hottest month ever recorded in human history. That's July 2021. And following that, there were also wildfires. Again, some of these snapshots are showing that there were wildfires even in Siberia, but also in Brazil, in New Zealand, in Greece, in Israel. Yeah, not that great. Not that great. In some places, even terrible. There was an earthquake in Haiti, something that wasn't discussed so much on the news, I have to say. You see, actually, this picture here, top. This should be top left. Your top left, yeah. This is one of the places where there's wreckage from that. The earthquake in Haiti was really catastrophic. It was 7.2, and 2,000 people died just pretty much instantly. 2,000 people dead. 1 million people, more than 1 million people, are affected by the earthquake because it caused a lot of damage, a lot of problems with infrastructure. There was about 100 schools there that were either completely eradicated or at least severely damaged. In Greenland, there was something really weird that was going on. Other than, the Greenland and Antarctica are the places where we have the ice caps and they're melting 30% faster than what they used to. There was, for the first time, rain recorded in Greenland, rain over the ice cap. So that's a very weird thing. In fact, it's so strange that the scientists who are investigating the area frequently, regularly, and they have all kinds of devices to measure things there, they can't tell you how much rain fell because they don't have the gauges there to measure that, because they're not equipped for it, because there's no reason that rain will happen there. And it did for the first time in our recorded history. So weird things, weird stuff, strange and sometimes catastrophic. And it seems like a confluence of these strange scenarios and catastrophic scenarios that are happening. And today we want to ask, why is this happening? Can Kabbalah somewhat shed light on the process that we are going through now together with planet Earth? I'm saying we, human beings, and planet Earth are going through something. What is that? Why does it seem like nature is so aggressive to us? Of course, scientists say that they see more and more connections between human activity and what we know as global warming. Of course, you know, the effect of greenhouse gases and gas emissions and so on. So they see connection between human activity and what's going on on the planet. But is that the whole story? Is it possible that there is a whole other realm of our relationship with the planet, with nature, that we're just not used to seeing, that we're just not perceiving? So that's what we want to find out today, and let's go. So look, when it comes to nature, this is the picture that comes to mind for me, at least. We are like a kid in a control room, because look, we don't really know how all the buttons are wired, you know, what really causes what. So it's almost like we can kind of push this button, twist this knob, twist this fader. What does that do? And we don't really know. We don't really know. Nature is a magnificent, harmonious system, and it is filled with wonders for us. And we are investigating and researching nature in many ways, many fields of research, but we really don't know all that there is to know. And so we tend to focus on what we can observe, on what we can see, because obviously we can't measure anything that we don't see. The problem is that we tend to focus on what we can measure, and what we can measure is typically mechanical actions that have direct or almost direct consequences. That makes you wonder, what about the rest of our being? How do our thoughts, desires, intentions, emotions, relationships, what role do they have in the natural system? Do they have any role, any function in this holistic system? If nature is one system, then how can it be that all of that area, this whole realm of human intentionality, is what? It's absent from nature, it's disconnected from nature. How does that work? So look, here's a map. This is a really cool map of science. This is researchers in Los Alamos. There's a national lab there, research lab. Anyway, they recorded interactions from scholarly databases, and they were trying to put together this map that shows the relationships that exist between different fields of science. Now, there's actually a link here where I can show this to you and zoom in. Yeah, I believe you can see this now. So this is pretty cool. This is pretty cool because it shows the actual interaction that exists between various fields of research. And so one of the conclusions you can draw from here is that take this field, for instance, right? I'm zooming in here on microbiology. So ultimately, microbiology is not completely disconnected from child psychology. And any other field of research that you will think about, ultimately, it will have some connection to any other field of research that you can think about. So acoustics can also be connected somehow to economics. And so this is why I like this map. I think it's a good exercise. Not only it's visually interesting, it's a good exercise because it helps us remember that nature is actually one holistic system. See, the problem that happens with our modern thinking, which is hugely influenced by scientific thinking, is while it's very good that we learn how to dissect pieces of reality, because otherwise we can't study them. We don't have any other way to learn reality except to dissect a certain part of it and penetrate it and zoom into it and see how it works. And this is how we develop expertise, and people become specialized experts in researching a very specific field, right? The problem is that we easily forget that it's also connected to all the other fields, and that all those fields of research are actually artificial mechanisms of perception, of human perception, that we have devised in order to look at reality in a way that we can understand, that we can make sense of. But from nature's point of view, there is no microbiology and child psychology and mineralogy and toxicology and economics and chemistry. There's nature. There's one holistic system. And so if nature is one system, that means that somewhere, somehow, our inner worlds, our intentions, our desires, our thoughts, that area of humanity that is inherent within us, that is so close to us and yet so unseen and so not properly researched because we can't properly measure it, that area has to be part of the natural system as well, if nature is one holistic system. So check out this this exercise here, right? So this is, okay, let me put myself on the other side here. This is the prehistoric man. Let's say it is. It's just a guy in a costume. But here's the thought exercise. I'm pretty sure that if you showed the prehistoric person a lighter, that would make you pretty much a god. Pretty much a god. Just imagine that situation where that poor guy tries to light up fire in a very primitive way, and it maybe takes him an hour or more. I don't know how long it took them, but they probably got good at it. But in any case, it took them time and effort. And then you come with your 21st century lighter, and you just go like flick, and you turn on fire. That would look like to him like like you're a magical creature that fire just came out of your fingers, right? Now think about what happens if we showed that prehistoric person a light bulb, how a light bulb works, right? So you could even show him that here's the light bulb, and look, when I flick a certain switch, when I flick a switch right here, this thing turns on. But even if he would understand that the flicking of the switch turns on the light, he'd still see it as magic because he has no idea of electrical wiring and electric currents and how that whole thing works. So for you, it's obvious because you were born into a world where it's obvious that if you click the light switch, there's a wire that goes from the switch all the way to the light bulb, and the circuit is closed, and then electricity passes, the current passes, and then there's light, right? So what does that teach us? That teaches us that even though we might not see a connection, it doesn't mean that the connection is not there. That's the only thing it tells us. That if we don't identify a connection between one thing and another, one phenomenon and another, a cause and a consequence, if we don't see the connection, the connecting thread, it doesn't mean that it's not there. All it means is exactly that we're not seeing it at the moment, right? So just to really dwell on how important perception is here, check this out. Let me remind you that only 500 years ago, people thought that the sun revolves around the earth. That was the accepted notion, the accepted reality. When someone suggested otherwise, it was not easy at all for people to accept it, right? On the left here, this is Copernicus, right? He is essentially the guy who was first to suggest this model that the earth revolves around the sun and not vice versa. By the way, if you really dig into history, you'll find that there was an ancient Greek astronomer even more than 1,000 years before Copernicus who also had the same idea. But in any case, this is what we're all familiar with. So 500 years ago, this guy comes up and says, look, this model makes a lot more sense. We revolve around the sun and not the other way around. People did not accept this at all. He publishes this model right before he dies. So that's already in the 16th century. And then his writings are banned. And almost a century afterwards, Galileo Galilei reinforces his model. And because of that, he spends his whole life, the rest of his life, in house arrest because people rejected that idea. And even after Galileo Galilei reinforces Copernicus and spends his life in house arrest for it, still, the writings of Copernicus are banned in some circles for even 300 years. So this just gives you a sense of how difficult it is for us to get used to a new understanding of reality, to a new paradigm of thinking, especially when it involves our role in the universe, our role in nature. So we have to take that into account. Now, this was 500 years ago, right? So you might be asking, okay, maybe we were different. People were very different back then. Now things are much better, or much, people get ideas better. It's much easier to understand things. Well, check this out. Just 25 years ago, no one knew that wolves can change rivers. That's right, wolves can change rivers. So 25 years ago, more or less, in 1995, wolves were reintroduced into the Yellowstone National Park, and they caused something called a trophic cascade. A trophic cascade basically means the following. It means that there are some indirect reactions that ripple through an entire food chain and an entire ecosystem to the point that they can change the whole system in its entirety. So here is what happened just 25 years ago in Yellowstone National Park. So the the wolves were reintroduced, not many of them in number, not many of them, after 70 years that they weren't there. And so here's what happens. What happens is that the wolves, as you know, they like to eat, to chase, and hunt deer. So they hunt the deer, and this causes the deer to stay out of places where they can be easily captured. And so as a result, a lot of areas, a lot of forest areas that were overgrazed by the deer are now vacant from deer, and they start growing dramatically faster. In some places, trees were 5 times higher in just a few years. And so trees grow higher, forests proliferate and expand and grow, and then birds begin to move in, all kinds of birds. And beavers begin to move in as well because they like to eat the trees. But beavers are pretty much ecosystem engineers in and of themselves because they build dams. And so they make these niches in the rivers where new life can emerge and prosper. And so fish and amphibians and reptiles and ducks and otters begin to crop up and increase because of these dams. And in parallel to that, the wolves also kill some of the coyotes, right? So less coyotes means more mice and more rabbits, and that means more badgers and more foxes and more hawks and more weasels. But the most interesting thing here is that because the wolves, and again, they didn't kill all the deer. They kept them at bay. They made them focus on specific areas. They made them make their life habitat certain areas and clear other areas. And their presence, the presence of the wolves, keep them in certain areas, and that keeps certain forests growing. And so as a result of that, the rivers began to respond to the presence of the wolves in the ecosystem. And so the amazing thing is that the riverbanks became more stable because the growth of vegetation made them more stable. They weren't collapsing as they were before, and that created rivers that are less meandering, more fixed in their course, and that created more pools that the rivers branch to, and narrower channels. All of these things are great for the ecosystem, are great for life to prosper there. And so 25 years ago, people didn't realize that wolves can change rivers. And that's something we should really put into our minds. There's two things here. One, we know a lot about nature today as opposed to what we knew 100 years ago, and yet we know so little about how it really works. Take the most the simplest, the most fundamental thing that thanks to that we are alive, like the magnetic field of the planet. We know there's a magnetic field. We know that it deflects solar wind, radiation that comes from the sun, and thanks to this magnetic field, we are alive and life can happen and prosper on planet Earth. We know very little about how that magnetic field works. We have some assumptions about how birds use it to navigate. Their brain sort of uses it, is connected to that field in a way that it uses it like a GPS system. And so we know very little about the very foundations thanks to which we are alive. That's lesson number 1 from this story. And lesson number 2, it's very hard for us to change our ideas about what's true and what's false, what's actually happening, and what is our place in nature. But what is it that nature wants, is what we should be asking. And so, in a word, as this image implies, it's very simple. Nature wants balance. That's it. If we had to put it really simply in a word, this is what I would say. Nature wants balance. But it doesn't end there. Nature also wants development. And so how does nature bring these two forces together, balance and development? And the answer is that nature works to create increasingly complex beings through dynamic equilibrium. What this means is that nature is constantly creating life and new levels of life, but every new element that is introduced into the system, its role in one way or another is to contribute to this dynamic balancing act that is happening, that is going on in nature. So for example, it took billions of years until a stable crust evolved on planet Earth in order to enable the next degree of life, biological life, to emerge on the planet. By the way, Kabbalist Bala Sulam, Yehuda Ashlag, writes specifically about this process of formation of planet Earth, because he explains through that example how there are two spiritual forces that create the manifestations of life on this planet. Actually did a video about that specifically, so I'll put a link in the description or in the comments afterwards if you're interested. But it took billions of years for Earth to form a stable crust for biological life to emerge, then another a few billion years to achieve optimal conditions on the planet, such as carbon dioxide and oxygen. They had to be balanced a certain way for animal life to prosper on the planet. And so this dynamically updating process where a dynamic balance is maintained, that is what nature is doing in every step of the way. Take a look at how Kabbalah explains a similar process that's taking place inside of us that is very similar to what we see in nature. What I'm going to show you now is a spiritual dynamic that Kabbalists refer to as three lines. And what this means is this: there is plus and minus, or two opposite forces, and the way we develop, the way we advance, goes like this. We move towards one side, then from there we move towards the other side, and then from there we move towards the middle. And so what happens is that through this fluctuation, where we go from plus to minus, we actually create something in the middle that is gradually increasing. What I'm describing here is the spiritual dynamic of human development. In other words, how a person develops his soul, or how a person develops spiritually. This is called advancement in three lines. This is something that Kabbalists write about extensively. The whole book of Zohar is about this progress in three lines. But the process that an individual human being is going through in a spiritual way is actually a replica. It is the same pattern by which nature evolves all living beings, even in the way that we discover it in our world. So, for example, we may think that something is going out of balance, right? Because every time we go here, or here, by the way, it doesn't matter whether we go towards the plus or the minus, it seems like we are losing balance. But what's actually happening is that we are in a preparation phase towards a new level of balance. And the only way by which this dynamic balance can be achieved is if we are gradually losing it and then recreating it, losing it again and recreating this balance on a higher level. Okay, keep this dynamic in mind and take a look at what some biologists describe, for example. Look at how similar this is. So there's an evolutionary biologist that I had an opportunity to feature in a documentary that I produced years ago. And her name is Dr. Elizabeth Sahtouris. She's an evolutionary biologist. And she describes a beautiful process of evolution that is very interesting in its similarity to what we just described. So in this process, there is an initial level of unity, which meaning an initial level of oneness that exists in nature. And I'll give an example in a second. And from that unity emerge individuals, meaning an individuation process occurs where something that is one mass, one thing, a unity of sorts, becomes many different things. And the result of this individuation process leads to a certain conflict and problems and mismatch and misunderstanding and miscommunication and chaos, if you will, that happens between the individual components. But that conflict ultimately leads to some resolution and cooperation, and that leads those components to become unified on a higher level. So, for example, in the beginning, the earth crust was essentially one big mass of minerals. It was just a single mass of minerals. But then, over time, it individuated into many different types of bacteria. So those minerals were packaged into different packages of different sorts, which meant different kinds of bacteria. And then these bacteria go through millions and millions of years where they are hostile to each other. They as if go through some juvenile phase where they try to invade each other and to take each other's resources and kill each other. But then ultimately, they discover that it's more productive, that it's more effective, that it's less effort, if you will, that it's more sustainable to share their resources and distribute their responsibilities. And so that is what leads to the emergence of the nucleated cell, where you have these organelles that are coming together to build the cell, which is the basic unit of life. And then these nucleated cells, they too individuate and become different kinds of cells. And those different kinds of cells go through a process where they invade each other and colonize each other and so forth, until they recognize that they can cooperate in a whole new way that creates multicellular organisms such as plants and animals and ourselves. And so in this ever-repeating maturation cycle, we see how balance is seemingly lost, but it's actually a preparation for a higher level of balance or a higher level of unity. We also learn from this that deeper levels of conflict precede higher levels of unity. They are required for a new level of unity to emerge. Okay, so there's another cell biologist that describes a similar picture. He describes, talks more about the relevance of us humans in this whole process, and he describes it as a seesaw. That's how he describes this dynamic. So I'm going to show you a little clip. This is, again, a cell biologist speaking. His name is Bruce Lipton. I had an opportunity to interview him, again, when I was working on a documentary. So this is a little clip from it, and then we'll go deeper. So I'll show you a clip. In the meantime, I'll be looking at some of your questions as well. So I'll get back to you, hopefully, with some answers if I find some relevant questions there. So let's watch a clip, and I'll be back right.
When you look at the planet Earth, you find that we live in a very narrow zone that supports life. A perfect combination of gases in the environment, a perfect temperature and all this, and it stays constant, which has been a very unusual event of how can a planet keep a constancy in a world where everything is dynamic around it? And the answer is because nature has created one organism after another organism to keep the environment in balance and compensate for the ranges of activities that occur around us. So we keep what is called homeostasis. Very simple example is this. When the world was primarily plants, the environment, which had carbon dioxide and some oxygen in it when they first started, later became depleted of carbon dioxide, and oxygen increased because the plants were using the carbon dioxide continuously and releasing the oxygen continuously, and the balance shifted. And there was so much oxygen on this planet that the planet was flammable. So at times, lightning strikes would hit and burn up all the oxygen and burn up the planet. Life was not sustainable. So nature created a balance. And the balance was called animals. Animals breathe in oxygen and release carbon dioxide, which is the complete reverse of what the plants were doing. So why is this relevant? Because when you put animals and plants in the same environment, as the plants take in carbon dioxide and release oxygen, the animals take in oxygen and release carbon dioxide. This creates a cycle and a balance and harmony. So animal introduction was not just a random event. It was required to keep balance in. Now look at life as a seesaw that goes up and down. And I go like this. As I put one organism on one side, it throws the balance off and tilts the seesaw this way. So nature puts another organism on this side to bring the balance back. So I said, where are humans in this seesaw? And why is that important? Because humans have so much power that if we're not clear of what we're doing, we can take the seesaw and put a little weight on one side and shift the entire balance of nature. And then we have to learn to come back and shift the balance back again. Well, without our awareness of how we fit into nature, we lost sight of the fact that every other organism has been involved in keeping the environment more stable. We weren't to manipulate the environment. But if the balance now shifts way off because of humanity, then it means that nature will no longer support human life on this planet. It says that we have upset the balance of the environment and are causing our own extinction. So the writing is on the wall. We have to work collectively to create harmony back in the environment. When we become aware of this, we can engage in that activity as the primary direction of human civilization.
Okay, all right. So this is really the question that we want to ask about this seesaw. Where are we on this seesaw? How do we influence it? And again, this is just one way to kind of visualize it. Of course, as you've seen, there can be other ways, but some scientists are already seeing a more holistic picture of nature and a more integrated understanding of our place in the natural system, and that our place is more influential than we might think. And that is, I would say, we could say maybe encouraging. Be that as it may, the question is really what happens with us humans. And so, 7 million years ago, basically an ape got smarter, right? So, it took a few million years until one dominant species of those apes remained. We can call it monkey plus. Scientists call it Homo sapiens, and that monkey started thinking that he's the ruler of the planet. Of course, judging from what we see today, there's very poor stewardship of the planet that we see. We see a species that is at war with itself. We see very bad management of resources. We see half the planet going hungry and suffering while the other half is making sure that it stays that way. And so, in short, let's say that the ape got smarter. That's questionable, but it depends on how we define smart, or right? But at least he thinks that he's the ruler of the planet. And so here's the thing. We have grown in a certain direction where we developed individual, independent consciousness that is almost separate from the natural system, almost separate from the program of nature. We think of ourselves as separate to nature. And that is, on the one hand, a great feat. It's a great achievement. We shouldn't disregard that, disrespect it. We are a creature that is capable of differentiating ourselves from the system that we're a part of, and we can investigate and research the previous levels that have led to our development. But when it comes to our own level, when it comes to our thoughts, our emotions, our desires, our intentions, we really have very little idea how that thing works and how all of that realm interacts with the natural system. And so, if the trend that we've been talking about, that we've been describing right here and here and here, if this trend continues in this evolutionary trajectory, then the conclusion about human development is inevitable, because it means that these humans will have to achieve a higher level of balance. Now, where is that higher level of balance? If the place where we are mostly imbalanced is our consciousness, is our inner world, then balance must occur, is bound to happen on that level as well. And this is what Kabbalists say that we are beginning to enter in our time, in the 21st century specifically. This is the time, Baal HaSulam explains, and others, where humanity is being pushed by the natural system to rise to that higher level of balance or higher level of unity, which involves human consciousness. Take a look at what Baal HaSulam tells us in his article, The Peace. I'll put my video away here so we can read the whole quote. So here's what he says. Nature like a skillful judge, punishes us according to our development. For we can see that to the extent that humankind develops, the pains and torments surrounding our sustenance and existence also multiply. Did anyone say heat waves, floods, wildfires, earthquakes? And besides the blows we suffer today, we must also consider the drawn sword for the future. This is something that scientists are seeing. Our future, in terms of where the planet is going, looks very bleak. The right conclusion must be drawn, and this is the important part, that nature will ultimately defeat us, and we will all be compelled to join hands in following its laws with all the measure required of us. So we have to get back to the notion that first and foremost, we are subject to the laws of nature. We're not greater than the laws of nature. We're not exempt from the laws of nature, and we exist within the natural system. We are surrounded by the natural program, and we have to calibrate ourselves and adapt ourselves to it and not the other way around. See, a few hundred years, just a few hundred years, that's it, took us from a very different kind of attitude to nature. Let's say how people treated nature in medieval times. Just a few hundred years separate us from that mentality, from that mindset, to where we are today. Today, we're so remote from the natural system in our minds that we think we're actually remote from it. Look, we live in buildings, some people in skyscrapers, far from the ground. We get our food in packaged plastics from a place where everything we want is already organized. It's a super place, right? The supermarket. It's very far from the food that comes from the ground and that we work for it in a direct way. And so I'm not saying, this is not a talk about food right now, even though it's a fascinating topic. What I'm trying to emphasize here is the distance that we walked from being connected to the ground, connected to the forces of nature, being very dependent on the rain and the sun. There's a good reason why ancient people worshipped the sun, right? And other forces of nature. And so we moved away from that perspective, from that mindset, to the point where we think of nature as resources to be used, exploited, depleted. Okay, this is a problem. We're depleting our resources. We need new ones, but that's it. The whole relationship aspect that we used to have with nature is lost, and it's nowhere in our education, in our ethics, in our mindset. It's just lost. We've lost sight of the fact that we are in a relationship with Mother Nature, with the governing laws of nature that are gradually developing us. And Baal HaSulam tells us here something very beautiful, that nature, like a skillful judge, first sentence, like a skillful judge, punishes us according to our development. That means that there's a difference between people who lived 100 years ago, 200 years ago, and so on, and people who live today in terms of how nature relates to us. And nature today wants us to join hands, as Baal HaSulam says, in following its laws to the highest degree, which means involving our conscious participation. Nature wants our consciousness, and this is why, from a Kabbalistic perspective, the mechanical actions to save us from the floods and the hurricanes and the tsunamis and the earthquakes and the heat waves and the viruses, by the way, so much climate destabilization. We forgot we're in the middle of a global pandemic that doesn't seem to go away. And as the ice caps are melting, scientists say there's about 15,000 different kinds of viruses that are about to emerge. In short, life can become very dangerous, very complicated, very quickly. And mechanical actions are not going to cut it if nature wants our consciousness. If nature wants our conscious participation, we have to learn what that means. And so, here and there, you see scientists that are beginning to see this picture to some extent. There are this is an article that came out a few days ago, describing this statement that 14,000 scientists signed. And essentially, the headline of it is that that Earth is dying, the planet is in a state of emergency. 14,000 scientists said that. And what's interesting to me is this quote right here. This is what experts are noticing. Check this out. The problem, the experts say, is that focusing too much on any single issue, right? Like carbon footprint, gas emissions, recycling, the plastics, etc. Focusing too much on one single issue might become a wild goose chase, right? Like you try to solve this, then you have a problem over there. You try to fix the gas emissions, then you have a problem with you try to do solar, then you have a problem with the coal to create the solar. You try to move to electric cars, then you have another problem. In short, a wild goose chase, or like a whack-a-mole game. They say that the overall problem, more than any single factor or hazard, is humanity's winner-take-all approach to planetary stewardship. So these are 14,000 scientists that recognize that it's not just that the climate is in crisis, that the planet is in crisis. It's also that, wait a minute, if we try to fix these problems mechanically, it's not going to cut it. It's just not going to work. There's not going to be a reality where we manage to stop and put a band-aid on this wound and that wound and this wound and heal this area and heal that area. There's just not going to be a reality where this is going to work. And so something more fundamental is emerging as something that needs to happen with us. And this is something that earth scientists are noticing from the inevitability of the situation. And this brings us to the question of, how do our inner worlds connect to the outer worlds? That is the transition point. This is the crossroads that we're in, if you will. This is the transformation, the great transition that we're going to have to go into. We're going to have to learn how actually, remember the picture in the beginning I showed with the kid in the control room with all those buttons? Nature wants us to start learning how the buttons actually work. What do the buttons do? Let me go back to this picture for a second. Right? So we are like this. There we go. Here we go. So we're like this kid, cute little kid, in the control room. To continue with this metaphor, nature wants us to learn how to operate the control room. And most importantly, the most important knob, or the most important button, that's what we have to learn how to do. So I'm not... Kabbalists are not ruling out actions for the sake of the environment. We're just saying it's insufficient. And it's not what nature is pushing us towards. And if we focus only on that, now scientists themselves, the earth scientists, are saying it's not going to cut it. Something fundamental in our approach needs to change. Kabbalists say what it is. So, how is it that our inner worlds connect to our outer worlds? And we don't have a lot of time left, so I'm gonna go into this quickly. And unfortunately, I'm seeing that I'm not gonna be able to go to a bunch of questions. So I'm already saying to all the Kabu students that I'll meet with you in Zoom right after this broadcast. And so you can ask all your questions there. And let's leave the chat. Let's right now leave in the chat some space for anyone who's not a Kabu student yet and does not join the Zoom chat session afterwards. If you have a burning question, throw it in the chat and I will do my best. So how is it that our inner worlds and outer worlds are connected? They are connected through the most fundamental substance of creation. The matter of creation, a spiritual matter, a non-material matter. I understand that sounds a little paradoxical, but the only thing that was created from which all these different shapes emerged, the still level of nature, the vegetative level of nature, the animate levels of nature, and the human level, 4 levels altogether, they are 4 levels of one fundamental substance that we call in Kabbalah the will to receive, or the desire. The only thing that was created by the governing force of nature, which is a force of bestowal, a force of fulfillment, of abundance, that wanted to fulfill, to exude abundance, to bestow, the only thing that was created is a vessel, is a desire to receive the abundance. And that desire was created in a process that Kabbalists refer to as the 4 phases of direct light. The 4 phases of direct light dictate the structure of the desire that all of reality is made of. And because it was made in a 4-stage process, it manifests in 4 stages of development. That's why we see the still emerging first, right? Billions of years, it was just planets. Before that, even just this cosmic soup of atoms, right? And then it took billions of years. It took about 9 billion years for that still level to finally give birth to Earth, for example. And then only about 4.5 billion years ago, Earth is formed. And that means that biological life is formed as well. Now we have the vegetative level that comes into play. And that takes a few billion years as well, along with the animate level as well. And then only a few million years ago, about 7 million years ago, there is an emergence of the human level from the animate level. And that is the 4th level of desire that emerges. And that level is connected to all the other levels. So I wanted to save time and not draw, but I see that it's required. So I'll add it here. Now you can see my drawing, hopefully. So here's how it works. So the 4 phases of direct light are this process where the light, or the quality of bestowal, creates this desire, which is like a vessel, in 4 stages: 1, 2, 3, and 4. By the way, I'll just throw something here. This is symbolized as the letter Yud. This is symbolized as the letter Hey. This one is Vav, and this one is Hey. And this is what is commonly referred to as the name of God. It's really what it represents is it's not some mystically unexplained name. In Kabbalah, it simply represents the template of creation, which is the pattern by which the light creates creation. And these symbols correspond to the levels that exist in creation. Let me just make this smaller, change the font quickly here. So these correspond to the levels of still, vegetative and animate and human. Let me just organize this a little bit. Okay. And so these 4 levels are levels of the same desire. This is what's important here. They are layers of the same being. So another way to put it would be to make it a circle within a circle. Whoops. 1 second. Yes. So a circle within a circle, and and another one, and even another one, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4. So these are layers of the same being. And so that is a critical point to understand, because if we want to ask ourselves how the human level affects all the other levels of creation, we have to understand that we're talking about other layers of ourselves, other layers of our being. That's the big revolution of the mind, that of perception, that a new model of reality that Kabbalists have been talking about for a long time, and it's going to take us a while until we start getting it and research reality this way. Look at what Baal Sulam tells us in his introduction to the article Panim Meirot Umaspirot. He says this: the value of one individual of the speaking species refers in Kabbalah to the human species, right? The value of one individual of the human level equates to the total value of forces in the vegetative and animate species existing in all of reality at present, as well as in all past generations. For man's force encompasses them and inherently consists of them. So in other words, we have such a force that encompasses and inherently consists of all the other layers, the still, the vegetative, and the animate. And therefore, look at what the introduction to the book of Zohar says. There's no reason to ask about the state of any of the created beings, including what we see on the still level these days: floods, hurricanes, earthquakes, heat waves, warming of the planet, viruses, all of those forces. There's no reason to ask about the state of any of the created beings besides man. Why? Not because they're not important. They're layers of us. The Kabbalah gives them assigns a unique kind of importance to them. But the thing is this: all other created beings rise and fall along with man without any account for themselves. In other words, the still, the vegetative, and the animate, including the floods and the hurricanes and fires and whatnot, they are forces of nature that have no account for themselves. They don't have any egoistic calculation, any self-calculation. They respond to the natural program. They don't have a conscious participation, something we can also call free choice, which is a term that needs to be defined in an hour of itself. But what's important is that these forces, they respond to the human level. And the human level, the speaking level that Kabbalists refer to, is not our body. That's the animate part of us. We have within us the still level, right? The atoms in our body, for instance. The vegetative level, there's a lot. All of our body is essentially a vegetative level, and the animate level, right? The hair, for instance, that grows on our head is like the vegetative level. In short, all these levels are included there, but the human level is beyond those three levels, and it's the primary cause of all of the ripple effects that tumble down the rest of the levels, just like we saw in the ecosystem examples that we talked about in the beginning. So we do have to conclude because I'm already 5 minutes after my deadline here. There's definitely more to discuss here. I get that. I am sorry that I really didn't get to questions so much. Here's what we'll do. I will quickly look at a few questions and see if I can do a quick blitz. And then we're gonna have to conclude. So let's at least try that. Forgive me, Kabbu students, for starting a few minutes later. I will come to our Zoom session in a few minutes. Let's do a few quick questions if we can. So let's see. Layers of our, someone is asking, asking layers of our soul, layers of our growth, layers of understanding. I'll just answer in a blitz fashion and say all of them. The other layers of being, yes, they're layers of our being. They're part of us. When we will learn how to correct ourselves, how to connect as a network. This is as a single network. This is what nature really wants from human beings. Then we'll also see that our attitude towards the still, vegetative, and animate will change. We'll feel connected to them. The problem that we have at the moment is a sense of disconnection. And it's a mindset of disconnection that stems from a feeling of disconnection. We don't feel connected to the planet and to each other. Because we don't feel connected to each other, we also don't feel connected to the planet. The moment we begin working on developing our connection to each other, we'll also feel connected to the rest of nature. It will be an effect, a natural effect of that will happen. The human, whoa, that was will this that question jumped? Sorry, I didn't know where it went. Okay, here's what I see. This will be our also separating from the Creator that forces us to ultimately call out to God for assistance. I see what you're asking. This is another aspect that we didn't discuss, but yes, the separation that we experience as humans from the natural program is deliberate. It's nature is doing it on purpose. This is what the evolutionary biologists are kind of seeing in the evolution, right? That bacteria, they go through a process of separation in order to then connect into multicellular organisms. And they see some purposefulness in that process. They just don't see the bigger picture and how it's relevant to humans. So yes, we are pushed away from the natural system, from our connection to the governing force of nature, in order to ask for it, to build a need for it of our own accord. Yes. Okay, I'm just scanning quickly to see if there's any question mark and a few words before it. Last one. Okay, the human level allows us to have this point in the heart. I see all these questions are from KS, so I'm really sorry. I hope your questions are reflecting what other people want to ask, because I just didn't see other question mark. So this is the last one. The point in the heart. Yes. If you want to summarize the essence of that human level, that the thing that really differentiates us from other beings, it is that point in the heart, meaning the desire to reconnect with the force that created us, with the source of our existence. That desire exists in every person. It's not by chance that children start asking at the age of 5 or 6, or in a very natural way, who am I? What is this world? What is this reality? What's going on? And unfortunately, typically the adults have no answer for them, or no good answer. And so it's a desire that exists in all people of the world, but those in whom it turns on, they are the ones that Kabbalists speak to and give them a method to realize it. We have to conclude. This took a few more minutes than expected. Sorry we didn't get to more questions. Thank you for being here, and hopefully this shed some light on how thoughts create floods or prevent them. We, of course, prefer the latter. Thank you very much for being here. I'm Joseph, and this was Kabbalah Explained Simply. All the best, and see you in the next one. Bye-bye.